the red-hot light of the North Star. She opened the earth, rocking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. She challenged it with burning eyes and black skin, torn skin, whipped skin, degraded skin, smashed skin, dehumanized skin, dehumanized skin. Strong enough to bring her free, strong enough to be free, to be free. To be free, strong enough to bring her feet, strong enough to be free. To bring her feet, strong enough to be free, strong enough to be free, strong enough to bring her feet, strong, 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 strong. North Star. The North Star caught the red hot light. She saw the dogs. She saw the death. She saw the new day. She saw the North Star. She heard the song. She sang the song. She was the song. Go down. Go down. Go down, Moses. Go down. Go down. Let my. Go down. Let my. Break down the walls of blood. Break down the walls of blood. Tell old Pharaoh. Break down the walls of blood. Break down the walls of blood. People go, break down the walls of blood. Break down the walls of blood. Let my. Take the hands of the people. Move it with the North Star. Let my people go. Pass the chains. Past the fields of blood, past the houses of mangled souls, past the broken back children. Past the history of twisted cathedrals, pray into insidious gods for more lives, more darkness, more arms and body parts to run the foul-smelling ship of laws, constitution, and rights. To the North Star! 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 People go! To the North Star! To the North Star! Let my! To the North Star! To the North Star! For all that is good, for all that is free. To the North Star. To the North Star. Beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night, she reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. cards. Screaming white hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. She challenged it with burning eyes and black skin, torn skin, whipped skin, degraded skin, smashed skin, dehumanized skin, dehumanized skin. Strong enough to bring a fee, strong enough to be free, to be free. To be free, strong enough to bring a fee, strong enough to be free.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Good morning and welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, we're going to just kind of throw it open to you, the listeners. Please communicate via the comment section. We seem to have had a bit of a conflict on scheduling, but as with all things in life, you just proceed. So with that, there's, first of all, an incredibly interesting piece that I saw this morning in the Washington Post, of all places. And let me just get there really quickly, because now that we are, now that the election has been settled, and we know that Donald Trump is going to be, I think, wait a minute, did we just get our issue resolved? Let me check here. We did. We did get our issue resolved. Oh man, this guy is phenomenal. Well, you know what? So let me do this. Let me hit this story, and then we'll bring my guest in, because I think this is very telling. If you all recall, towards the end of the campaign, J.D. Vance made some incredibly racist comments about legal Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. And Vance's comments were then quickly followed by Donald Trump. So now there's an interesting piece in the Post: the Haitians of Springfield, a Trump campaign target, brace for his presidency. It really talks about how concerned Haitians in Springfield, Ohio are. They say that most of them are not citizens. They couldn't vote. They are here legally. They have contributed greatly. Some will say revived the economy of Springfield, Ohio, but that they are feeling very insecure now. They are feeling threatened because of the racist tropes, the eugenic-based tropes that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump hurled at them. They're being threatened. And it's just incredibly telling. These are some of the stories and some of the issues that we're going to have to pay very close attention to as the Trump administration takes hold. And it'll also be very interesting and very interesting to see what now happens with the U.S. policy towards Haiti, because as you all know, under the Biden administration, with Kamala Harris as vice president, the United States was trying to reinvade Haiti. She went to CARICOM along with Hakeem Jeffries, trying to convince CARICOM to reinvade Haiti. They got William Ruto, the president of Kenya, to be the minstrel blackface on that imperialism. And so now it'll be very interesting to see what happens with the U.S. policy. Will Donald Trump change that policy of re-invading Haiti? And as I've said to you numerous times, folks, a lot of times we see these policies as administration policies when in fact they are American foreign policy. So with that being said, today's discussion, the U.S. and the issue before us is, are we close to World War III? And if that starts, will it go nuclear? My guest is a foreign Marine intelligence officer who served in the former Soviet Union, implementing arms control agreements, and on the staff of General Norman Schwarzkopf during the Gulf War, where he played a critical role in the hunt for Iraqi Scud missiles. From 1991 to 1998, he served as a chief inspector for the UN in Iraq, leading the search for Iraq's proscribed weapons of mass destruction. His new book, Covering Ukraine, the Scott Ritter interviews through the eyes of Anya Kay. Scott Ritter, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me. I apologize for the setting, but I had an escaped dog situation, so I've been spending literally the last 30 minutes running through the swamps of upstate New York, trying to hunt down a wild Pomeranian, but I got him, And
What's the status of this is breaking news, folks. This is breaking news. Scott's Pomeranian escaped. What's the status of Fluffy the Pomeranian? Oh, there he is. All right. Okay.
so
All right.
Fluffy the Pomeranian is covered in swamp water and mud and all that good stuff, but I got him.
You always do, folks. He'll find Scud missiles. He'll find Fluffy the Pomeranian. So, Scott, man, thank you for joining us today. So let me start with this first question. The election is over. The people have spoken. Former President Trump will now be sworn in January as the 47th president. Just overall, your thoughts?
I think we're looking at a revolutionary moment in American history. This isn't Donald Trump, the wild card, where MAGA was an unformed movement that we saw in 2016. This is Donald Trump, the revolutionary at the head of a legitimate political movement, MAGA, that just swept an election, a national election. The mandate that he's been given is unprecedented in recent times. Popular vote, nobody thought that was coming. Sweeping electoral college vote, control of the Senate, probable control of the House, and a 7-2 Supreme Court that's going to stay that way because he's going to be able to appoint, the next two Supreme Court justices. And it's not just that. He has a vice president who is not of the establishment. He has a MAGA vice president. And he's going to spend 4 years grooming J.D. Vance. And then J.D. Vance has the opportunity to govern for an additional 8 years because the Democratic Party is finished. The Democratic Party is dissolved. I mean, when all they can do is put up Joe Biden or handpick somebody that nobody ever wanted to be president, Kamala Harris, to become president, Nancy Pelosi is done, Chuck Schumer's done. There's nobody in the wings that's capable of putting together national leadership. The demographics upon which the Democratic Party was building itself are collapsing because they're drifting toward MAGA, not Republicans, but MAGA, Make America Great Again. I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm not saying that MAGA is going to succeed. I'm saying that they have been mandated to carry out revolutionary change. And now, unlike 2016, we have a Congress that's ready to do this. You're going to see reforms like you've never seen before, and Congress will go along. Trump will get the cabinet he wants. And this can be a cabinet of extreme change, for the better, for the worst. Again, I'm not saying this is all going to be good for America. I'm just saying America needs to strap in because this will not be politics as usual. We are looking at the Trump revolution, and it's about to begin.
And Scott, so let me ask you this, because you're so gracious to join us from the car. Do we need to give you some time to get into the house? How do you want to do this?
No, I would have asked for that time, but I'm still in the swamplands. The escape dog phenomena was a lengthy phenomena, and I'm far away from my home.
Okay, yeah. Pomeranians, they can get out and get up when they want to. To your point, now, Salty Cyclist says, not say I agree, but Gavin Newsom can run for the DNC. That is true, but what I understand you to say as it relates to the Democrats is Gavin Newsom is one person. Gavin Newsom is one personality. What I understand you to say, and what I've been saying for a very long time, the Democrats don't have a bench. The Democrats don't really have a structure, an infrastructure that is prepared to deal with the whipping that they just took.
Gavin Newsom will not win Michigan. Gavin Newsom will not win Pennsylvania. Gavin Newsom will not win Ohio. Gavin Newsom will not win America. I mean, he's a name. He's a California governor. California politics are not the politics of America. And again, remember, he's a name now. When you have the Biden administration, you still have the establishment in place. In 4 years, the establishment as we know it will be dead, dismantled. And the Democrats have nothing to slow it down. They don't have Congress. They don't have the Senate. They don't have a Supreme Court. They don't have anything that can slow this down. So, that's the problem. You put Gavin Newsom on the ticket in 2028, and you're looking at an electoral sweep even greater than the one that just occurred.
Wow. Okay. So with that now, let's move to the topic at hand. Back in February, Russian President Putin was asked who he would prefer to work with, and he said that he preferred Joe Biden to Donald Trump, but was willing to work with any U.S. president. There were those who tried to read between some lines, but as I've always understood him, and you have been very, very clear, when you listen to Vladimir Putin, there's not a whole lot of ambiguity. There's not a whole lot of reading between the lines you need to do. He says what he means what he says. I saw his statements as being pretty straightforward because any leader, what he was saying was, I prefer predictability and stability over instability and someone who is unpredictable. He sees Trump as unstable and unpredictable. Your thoughts, Scott Ritter?
No, 100%. It's not just, Vladimir Putin that said this. One of the last conversations and ongoing conversations I had with Anatoly Antonov, who's the former Russian ambassador to the United States, about this very issue is he said, look, Russia doesn't want to have anything to do with American politics because Russia views American politics as being unchanging when it comes to Russia, that the issue of Russophobia has infected all parties. The establishment is aligned against Russia, so it doesn't matter if the head of the establishment is Democrat or Republican. What the Russians want is predictability. Even if it's a person that's hostile to Russia, Russia will at least be able to build a consistent policy to deal with that reality. And so, Biden or Harris were seen as predictable, not good for Russia, but that Russia would be able to create predictable policies to deal with, an administration that was adversarial to Russia. Here comes Trump. The Trump experience from 2016 with the Russians was of unpredictability, but backed by an establishment that was still openly adversarial to Russia, which means that nothing good was going to come from the chaos. This time it's a little bit different because the establishment you are not, I'm just telling America, wake up. Things are about to happen that have never happened before in our lifetime. A purging of the establishment. Trump has a visceral hatred for what many call the deep state, the blob, whatever you want to call it, the unelected civil service, which has over time gravitated what he deems towards the Democrats, but I say towards the duopoly, towards the two big parties. MAGA's not part of the duopoly. MAGA's something totally different. There's a chance now for Russia that while it won't be, Russia loving, there's a chance that in the interest of serving American interests and seeking to avoid conflict, and if you can purge the establishment and replace it with people who are going to actively implement the vision of not just Trump, but again, I'm talking about a potential 12 to 20 year sea change in how America integrates with the world, that Russia might say, this is somebody we can work with. I mean, Trump has to earn that. Russia's not going to jump in with 2 feet, but I do believe this is a fundamentally different, scenario. When people spoke of a potential Trump victory in 2024, how many people said it was going to be a sweeping mandate? I mean, people said if he wins, it's going to be one of those, tight races down to the last second, a divided country. He's not going to have the support of the establishment, et cetera. That's not the reality that exists anymore. He's going to destroy the establishment, create something new, and be able to implement his vision. And it's not just a 4-year vision, but because J.D. Vance is MAGA, not Republican, it's a potential 12-year vision with the potential of going on even further because the Democrats don't have a bench, don't have people that can stand up. And that's the kind of predictability that the Russians like.
You mentioned an unelected civil service, and that made me think about how different this must be now, because Richard Nixon, one of his issues and one of his designs was to plant like minds and ideologues into the civil service so that after his administration ran its term, he would still, or they would still have their people in place. Now you have Donald Trump with a different approach.
Yeah, he's not trying to infiltrate the establishment. He's going to kill the establishment. I mean,
right.
And I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. It's going to happen. I'm somebody who has been extremely critical of the so-called deep state of the establishment because they have lost touch with reality. They're implementing policies that support a rules-based international order that is no longer viable in terms of American interests or viable in terms of how the world works. And they're unwilling to change. They're incapable of change. And so now, when somebody comes in and says, I want to end that establishment, I'm like, yes, I'm all for that. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, but Donald Trump isn't talking about infiltrating the establishment. He's talking about killing the establishment and replacing it with in a similar vein, with ideologically aligned people who will not oppose his policy. Just so everybody understands this, had Trump had ideologically aligned people, we wouldn't have a crisis in Korea today. Donald Trump wanted to denuclearize North Korea, and he was willing to engage with them economically, redefine diplomatic relations. And the establishment, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, killed it, betrayed him. There was no support in Congress for this. And today we have a nuclear-armed North Korea with ICBMs that can reach America, who's in bed with Russia and China. And it's a totally different world than what it could have been. And so people who say, well, I'm not happy about Trump talking about putting in ideologically aligned people, I would say that the track record is that, maybe some good things could have happened by that.
And to that point, I wanted to stay with Russia, but you make the point on North Korea. So let me ask this. When you look at Donald Trump in the first 2 years of his administration versus the last year and a half or so, there seemed to be a bit of a shift. It seemed as though he got a message from the establishment. So are we seeing, is it possible that we're going to see a different Donald Trump whose ideology is more in line with the elite? Or do you get the sense that the Donald Trump we're going to see is that rogue wild card that was so unpredictable and that Vladimir Putin didn't prefer to deal with? Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. I think we're going to see, first of all, I don't believe we're going to see a Donald Trump who's going to be intimidated by the establishment. He's going to kill the establishment.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just, pulling departments out. Look, if we're an FBI agent right now in the National Security Division, I'd be looking for a new job. If I were in the National Security Division of the Department of Justice, I'd be looking for a new job because these are the people that came after Donald Trump. This is personal to him. He doesn't see any legitimacy in what they've done. And so he is going to take them out. And he's going to do that across the board. So there's no establishment to intimidate him. He has the mandate for change, and he will go after that. So, the problem is going to be what he builds in its place. And can he build it? And that's the unpredictability that Putin despises is a Trump that says one thing but does another. What we're going to get now is a Trump that's going to say something, and the question isn't that he's going to do something. Is he able to build the the infrastructure, the diplomacy, the military, the economic infrastructure capable of fulfilling his vision. And there's the unpredictability. But I do think the difference here is that Russia and China might be willing to work with this guy as opposed to view it as a threat. Because, in this election, we have, foreign policy, when you look at the exit polls, polled 3 to 5%, saying 3 to 5% of Americans were concerned about foreign policy. That number is absolutely misleading. I'll tell you why. Because the biggest thing people talked about was the economy. But there's not a foreign policy issue out there today that doesn't impact the economy.
Right.
And so the people were indirectly saying that these endless wars, these economic wars, these sanctions, they are hurting us economically. Things have got to change. The establishment can't change that. The American establishment, the one that gives us the rules-based international order, which is predicated upon continuous conflict to feed the military-industrial complex, won't change. But if you change the establishment, you redefine how America interfaces with the world, and you can do this over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 election cycles. This is predictability, and this is what Russia and others are looking for.
Daniela says, no, Trump won't change anything. I don't know that Daniela's been paying attention, but I think Trump's going to change everything. Scott Ritter.
Well, in defense of Danielle, we've seen this act before. 2016, he was the guy of change. I have to say, I supported Donald Trump in 2016 because of my desire for the changes that he promised, and he failed to deliver. So, once bitten, twice shy. I understand that. All I would say is that this time it's different because he's not trying to coerce the establishment. He's going to destroy the establishment. And that I truly believe is going to happen.
Especially with the Supreme Court ruling, basically not holding him accountable, basically saying as president, you can do what you want to do. Now, not only does he have a House and a Senate, he's got a Supreme Court that's already told him, man, go forth and multiply.
Yeah. And people will be screaming constitutional this, constitutional that. You just said the key words. The key thing to the Constitution is it's we have 3 branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. They're supposed to hold themselves in checks and balance. But what the Supreme Court has said, and Congress has mandated through, War Powers Act and things like that, that we literally have a unitary executive that can do anything it wants to do without any legal consequence. Congress can impeach. I mean, that is what the Supreme Court says. The Supreme Court says if Congress is unhappy with the executive, they can impeach the executive. Trump ain't getting impeached by this Congress. Trump is going to be backed by this Congress. This is why I believe there's going to be significant change. Again, it's unprecedented. I'm not going to predict success. I'm just going to predict change. And we need to be prepared for dramatic change in how America functions.
The topic of today is, are we headed towards World War III? And if so, will it go nuclear? Ukrainian officials are feeling, quote, a lot of anxiety, end quote, after the victory. Zelensky congratulated Trump on his impressive election victory, but it's being reported in the Financial Times that behind the scenes, Ukrainian officials are feeling a lot of anxiety. Trump campaigned on ending the war in Ukraine. He never really explained how he was going to do that. Your thoughts on I won't even elaborate any further. Scott, your thoughts on that point. Will Donald Trump come in, shut off the spigot, and put a stop to the conflict in Ukraine?
If Ukraine's hired me as a political consultant right now, I would say that you have until January 20th to get the best deal possible.
Wait a minute. Because I think before they hire you as a consultant, or at least as a consultant to Scott Ritter, might I suggest that we get them to take you off of the hit list before they bring you on as a consultant?
Well, that's their choice.
Okay.
I can consult long distance,
Okay.
as opposed to
Okay.
in person.
All right.
But no, you're right. I mean, it's an absurdity because they want to kill me right now because they don't agree with what I'm saying. But if they had ever listened to what I said, every policy I articulated was in defense of Ukraine, in defense of Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian infrastructure, the Ukrainian economy, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Had they gone along with my advice, the war would be over, their economy would be thriving, 700,000 men would be alive, and they would have Kherson and Zaporizhia as a functional part of Ukraine, and that they would be able to maintain cultural ties with Crimea and the Donbass, even if they didn't have political control. But that's not the route they chose, and now they're facing absolute destruction. But what's going to happen after January 20th is what's called resource starvation. They basically, the lifeline, the economic and material lifeline that has been extended to them will no longer exist. And with that goes hope. And when soldiers lose hope, they don't fight anymore. And that will be the total collapse of the Ukrainian military, the total collapse of Ukrainian society, and the deal they'll get in collapse is one of total unconditional surrender dictated to them by an absolutely victorious opponent. But right now, if Ukraine sits down with Russia and works with Russia using the terms put forward by Vladimir Putin, that they'll get the best deal possible under the situation. Russia is willing to be flexible on some things, not core things. I mean, they will never be part of NATO. They are not going to have a 700,000 strong military. There will be denazification changes to the constitution, but they'll get to keep Odessa. They'll get to keep Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, things of that nature.
Kiev.
And Russia will work with them. Kiev, and Lvov, and there'll be a whole bunch of people that'll be living, and they'll have a viable economy, and all this. That's what I would advise, because this war is over. I mean, it's been over for some time now, but the Biden administration continues to put it on this life support, and there's still talk now of trying to rush in $6 billion more. I just want to tell the people that are pushing for that, we've already given them over $120 billion, and they've lost the war. $6 billion thrown in at the last second isn't going to change anything. That's like me, deciding to invest $30,000 in repairs on a house that has been gutted by fire. I'm sorry, the house isn't going to be repaired by 30,000. You're just throwing good money after bad, and that's what's going on here. This war is over. Donald Trump will bring an end to the Ukraine conflict. It is not going to involve, a threatening phone call to Putin. It's simply going to be resource starvation for Ukraine. And the situation is going to be fundamentally different in January 20th of next year than it is today. Ukraine's position will be far weaker. They won't have any chips to put on the table. So now's their chance. Right now, get the best deal you can.
And Salty Cyclist says very simply, Scott cares. And I think that's, and also you in this chat, you've been nominated for president, and you've also been nominated for national security advisor. So let's talk about that, Scott.
Just not dog catcher, because I'm pretty bad at dog catching. So.
You got him you caught him. So and let me explain, folks. That's why I know Scott is not at the drive-through window at a McDonald's. Scott is in the swamplands of upstate New York after having captured the wayward Pomeranian. So, Scott, in listening to what you've just explained about Ukraine and resource, and Daniel, thank you for that super sticker. In understanding what you've just said about resource starvation in Ukraine, two things. One, that seems as though it'll lessen the probability of conflict. Two, lessen the probability of nuclear conflict, but it's going to piss off Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. So will that money be shifted to China?
I think when Trump says that he doesn't want a war, I think he's serious about not wanting a war.
Okay.
He's also someone who says he wants a strong military. And I'll tell you right now, if I were a defense contractor, the last thing I'd be pushing is war. And what I'd be pushing is the repletion of our depleted arsenal. We have stripped away everything. I mean, you have the Pentagon right now saying there's literally you can't give anything to anybody right now because we have nothing. You've gone into our war fighting stocks. We can't fight a war right now. And so if I were advising, Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, I would be telling them to promote policies of peace and stability, to not run interference on that, but also say that peace through strength. And therefore, Mr. President, we need to build up our stocks. And if I were them, I'd point to the Ukrainian conflict and say, the things we factored in the past in terms of what we needed on hand were woefully insufficient. That when we rebuild, we need to rebuild massively so that nobody doubts our ability to sustain a conflict. And now you'll have defense spending. Now, I don't like that as an American citizen because it's wasteful spending. But I'm just telling you that there is a way for the defense contractors, the military industrial complex, to continue to rake in their profits without having Donald Trump having to yield to their greed by getting us involved in more conflict. J.D. Vance, who is now the vice president, who's going to be groomed to replace Trump. Trump is a one-term president. And he knows this, and he knows that whatever changes he does, in order for them to be meaningful and in order for people to buy into these changes, there has to be the potential of sustainability. So he's not going to put J.D. Vance on the back shelf and hide him. He's going to use J.D. Vance. And J.D. Vance made a very telling presentation the other day where he said, look, the first thing China does when it goes into another nation is build a road. And he said, this is what we need to start doing. So I think that is the strategic direction of a potential future Trump administration. Let me put it this way. I'm not, if I had voted for Donald Trump in this election, it would have been holding my nose, meaning that I'm not happy with Donald Trump. I'm not happy with things about him. But when we deal with what was out there in the alternative, I have gone on record saying this. I view the danger of nuclear war as the existential issue of our time. It's the existential issue. And had Kamala Harris been elected president, there is no doubt in my mind, and I've run the numbers over and over again, we would have had a nuclear war within 6 months to a year of her being president. America just dodged a very, very big bullet because I do believe Donald Trump does not. He's the only candidate that spoke about the genuine dangers of nuclear war. I'm not saying he has a disarmament strategy. Hey, Donald or your advisors, call me. I got one for you. It'll work. But he at least he acknowledged that nuclear war is dangerous and better relations with Russia helps prevent nuclear war. And he didn't just say it. He had RFK Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. write a major piece in The Hill that was published with Donald Trump's approval that gave voices, the only candidate to do this. So I am very optimistic that at least the path that will be initially taken by the Trump administration will be a path seeking to de-escalate, to avoid conflict, to avoid nuclear war. And the good news is, if he's successful in taking down the establishment, there won't be any opposition internally.
Muslim Revert wants you to run the Pentagon. And let me say, you said if you had voted for Donald Trump in this election, let me thank you for that one vote I got. Now I know you wrote me in on the ballot. So that one vote I got from New York came from you. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Your point about rebuilding the American arsenal. There's to me, a very strong argument for that, because when you look at what's happening in Ukraine and you understand how Russia has been preparing for this very type of war of attrition using artillery, they have just been over the years stockpiling artillery. in anticipation of this kind of conflict. So I bring that up, A, to ask you, am I right? And B, this is evidence of the type of strategy that you were just referring to.
100%. Look, I mean, first of all, the Russians inherited a system from the Soviet Union that had a defense enterprise that was geared towards large-scale ground combat. And they had the sustainability built into everything. The Russians reorganized just like everybody did in the aftermath of the Cold War, going, de-emphasizing army-level fighting and focusing more on brigade structures, small scale warfare, etc. And so they too allowed their military to lapse into uh, disrepair in terms of sustainability. Much of the sustainability that we saw early on was Russia reaching into Cold War era stockpiles and drawing upon that. But they had to revamp their defense industry to get their production levels up to where they need to be to support this kind of war. So even Russia made a mistake. But the difference is Russia had a defense industry that was capable of being rapidly retooled and rapidly brought up to speed. We don't. We don't have a procurement cycle that's conducive to that. Our procurement cycle is designed actually to make procurement as long as possible so that the companies make as much money as possible. It's not designed for efficiency, rapidly turning problems around, cutting costs. That's not what we do.
That's how we wind up with an F-16 that can only fly or can only take off from pristine runways because the engines hang so low that they suck up debris off the runway, and we wind up with F-35s that are called the flying pianos that can't fly in the rain.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Well, just wait till you see the new Sentinel ground-based ballistic missile that will probably never get built because we can't afford it. It's already so over budget that they had to shut down the very beginnings of the production cycle because what was supposed to only be a $120 billion system is heading towards the $1 trillion figure. It's the same thing with the new submarine that we're building, the new bomber, the B-21 bomber. We can't afford these weapons, and these weapons won't work, and they won't be out in time. We're talking about getting these weapons deployed in sometime in the mid to late 2030s. Russia, meanwhile, has revamped their entire nuclear arsenal. They have brand new missiles, brand new submarines, brand new everything, and their whole army has been upgraded. We have a M1 tank that that dates back to the 1970s. A Bradley, our concept of warfighting is fully grounded in the Cold War, and then it's been further deteriorated by 2 decades of low intensity conflict in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, etc. We don't know how to fight large-scale ground combat, and our defense industry isn't geared towards making this happen. So, look, you talk about artillery. We have a Scranton plant that produces on an annual basis basically the number of shells that are expended in 1 month of intense combat. That's how ill prepared we are for this, and we don't have other plants out there that can up it. We can't up the production, and this is what, again, if I were Trump and I were defense contractors, this is what I would be focused on: not trying to get us into new wars, but supporting avoiding conflict, but building our military so that if we ever had to go to war, we could guarantee a victorious outcome because of the quality of our equipment and the sustainability of our effort. And that is a deterrence factor in and of its own right. When nations fear the potential of a conflict with the United States, diplomatic solutions become more viable. But when they no longer believe the United States has the ability to project power into a region, sustain, combat, etc., they might feel inclined to be more aggressive. The last thing America needs to do right now is come off appearing weak. But I'm not in favor of irresponsible muscle flex. And I think there's a middle ground that can be found here. And I believe that Donald Trump is, of the 2 candidates, he's the only one capable of going down that path.
2 things. One, I have an idea. I have a design for a new type of bullet that I think would be incredibly, incredibly effective and beneficial to the American economy. It's called a bullet train. The United States needs to focus on the bullet train. That might help us. You mentioned in passing, and I'd like for you to elaborate on this. I asked about World War III, and you said if Kamala Harris, and that you've run the numbers, if you could elaborate on what do you mean when you say you ran the numbers, and that if Kamala Harris had been elected president within months, we would be in World War III. I think that means because she was just talking about continuing Biden policy. Scott Ritter.
100%. Look, when you run the numbers on something like this, you look at potential outcomes. You look at diplomacy, you look at the military, and you look at existing policy, and you look at the potential for flexibility in that policy. Kamala Harris said that the number one adversary for the United States was Iran, and that she views Iran as an adversary in an adversarial relationship. So what happens when we are compelled to confront Iran because of our support for Israel? What happens if Iran does launch True Promise 3 and does heavy damage? We know what the Biden administration is doing. They're sending 6 B-52 bombers and they're deploying other forces. It's threatening the potential use of American military power in response. Kamala Harris would inherit that. Biden at least has the background to have the potential of bluff. What do you do when you take a candidate who says, when she was attorney general, I mean, she gave this speech, I'm not making it up, the power of the pen. I had the power of the pen to destroy lives, she said. With one stroke of the pen, I could have you arrested, locked away, thrown away, ruin your life, etc. That's her thinking. You have to factor this in. So now she's the president. She's confronted by Iran. Where is the experience in her, the confidence not to go to war? She will have to look tough. She will have to confront them. But now confront them with what? We don't have the military capability to sustain conventional conflict. And so at some point in time, she will fall back on nuclear employment plans written by Donald Trump, by the way, when the establishment had control of them back in his first term, nuclear employment plans to bring in 2 new categories of nuclear weapons, a B-61 air-delivered bomb designed to penetrate deep underground sites, and the W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon fired by a Trident missile with its hypervelocity able to penetrate deep. Those are the only 2 systems that can destroy Iran's underground nuclear facilities, and she would use them. That's where we get into a nuclear war. And the same thing with Ukraine. I don't think she knows how to gracefully exit Ukraine. And she can't afford, given her ego and the need to be dominant, she can't afford an Afghanistan-type debacle there. So I do believe that you would see her double down on the provision of American equipment, turning to our NATO allies, and maybe provoking some sort of boots-on-the-ground scenario that Biden had at least the ability to say no to. I think she would, and I think she would say yes. And now we end up with a shooting war with Russia, 100% of the time turn nuclear. And this is what I said. In either one of those scenarios, we have a nuclear war. And then I haven't even factored in Taiwan, China, and North Korea, which again brings up all renewed potential for nuclear war. Kamala Harris was not the president we needed. She's not a Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy's the guy who, not just the Cuban Missile Crisis, but studied the Berlin Wall crisis, one pressure he was under by his military leaders to forcefully confront the Soviet Union in Berlin and the potential of nuclear conflict that was avoided. Jack Kennedy was able to do that. Kamala Harris is no Jack Kennedy.
Augustus Omega says to a viewer, Brad, nobody is going to attack the U.S. Well, that may be on U.S. soil, but I know Ansar Allah ran some U.S. Carriers out of the Red Sea. You mentioned True Promise 3, and people need to understand, I believe True Promise in Islam is considered their final day of judgment. And that True Promise 3 is a Iranian attack, a substantial Iranian attack on the Zionist colony of Israel. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, True Promise 1 was the response that the Iranians gave to the Israeli attack on a consulate in Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the massive attack with drones, cruise missiles, etc. But it was more of a gimmick. It was more of a, we're going to flood the market here just to show potential. And they had 9 missiles penetrate the defense shield and hit the targets as a, demonstration of possibility. Operation True Promise 2 came after the Israeli assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and a senior Hamas official in Tehran on Inauguration Day after he just met with the Iranian president. And so this one brought in a strike of 180 to 200 ballistic missiles, 90% of which penetrated the Israeli missile defense shield and hit the targets they wanted. True Promise 3 is designed to be something far different. Over 1,000 missiles, potentially 2,000 missiles, all of the most modern missiles, and this is designed to physically destroy Israel. It's a completely different strike altogether. I believe, again, under a here's the difference again between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said in the campaign that he is in favor of lifting sanctions with Iran and working with Iran towards a mutually beneficial relationship. That he's not into regime change in Iran. He can work with the government the way it is. So if I'm the Iranians listening to that, and then I'm looking at Israel, which is just self-destructing, Israel doesn't need any help right now to be destroyed. It's destroying itself. The firing of Galant, the near civil war that exists, a number of different topics. If I were the Iranians, I wouldn't launch True Promise 3. There's no reason to. If the goal is to destroy Israel, why not let it destroy itself and you preserve peace and stability, which, of course, remember, Iran is a member of BRICS, and one of the main things that came out of the BRICS meeting in Kazan is a policy emphasis on de-escalation. Do not escalate. Do not seek war. That is the direction that BRICS is supposed to be heading in. Iran is a member of BRICS, and so I do believe that there's real potential now for Iran not to launch True Promise 3 and let the Trump administration. Let's see what the Trump administration can do to bring about an end to the fighting, and also. I firmly believe that the Trump administration can't revive Israel. I think Israel has fatally harmed itself, and that we're looking at, Israel collapsing from within a year to 5 years.
To your point about the Trump administration's direction or focus on Iran, and not looking for regime change and looking to find a path for peaceful coexistence, my words, not yours. Then how do we square that, or how does Iran look at the potential of that when it was Donald Trump that pushed the button on General Soleimani? It was Donald Trump that took the United States out of the JCPOA, and Trump told Netanyahu just a week ago, clean this up, finish this up before I get here on the 20th of January.
Yeah, there's a couple things. Again, if I were advising the Iranian government, and I'm not, and I won't, but this is free advice right here. You can take it as you want it. Again, I would remind them that the Donald Trump that governed from, in the first term was a Donald Trump firmly in control of the establishment. And the establishment hijacked him and got him to do things like the assassination of Qasem Soleimani.
Okay.
I would also go ahead.
No. I'm locked in. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. I would also point out to the Iranians that, the JCPOA, and I would just remind them to go back in their own negotiating record. They knew the United States would never, ever comply with the JCPOA. Barack Obama admitted it before he signed it in April of 2015. He said the sunset clauses will never allow them to expire because we're never going to let Iran get to that point. We're going to reevaluate how Iran has cooperated and voluntarily walked away from their nuclear enrichment. And if they haven't, we're not going to let them get this stuff, we'll re-engage at that point. The United States was never, ever, ever going to comply. Donald Trump, and I said this at the time, he's the only honest politician we have, because he looked at the deal and he said, this is stupid. This is a deal that he told the intelligence committee, you're telling me that they have a nuclear weapons program that they stopped in 2003, but it's never been fully defined. It's never been fully dismantled. It's there in hibernation. And you're telling me that when the sunset clauses expire, Iran will have the ability to enrich uranium to levels necessary for a nuclear weapon, that they can now reactivate this new. He said, this isn't about getting rid of the potential. This is giving Iran the potential of a nuclear weapon. That's their extreme interpretation, but that's consistent with the intelligence he was being given. So he said, I'm terminating this thing. I want a better deal. Well, the good news for Donald Trump is that the JCPOA is terminated, thanks to him. It ain't coming back, thanks to Biden. The bad news is Iran has nuclear weapons capability. So now the question is, what is Donald Trump going to do about that? And therein lies the rub. But this is where the potential of negotiation exists. So I honestly believe that Donald Trump will be looking for a deal, not looking for confrontation when it comes to Iran and its programs. And this time, he will not be married to the policies of the staff. Now, I'm a little worried here because I haven't seen Donald Trump say this, but there's people out there saying that Brian Hook will be managing the State Department's transition. And Brian Hook, of course, is the guy that brought in the extreme anti-Iranian policies. He's the one that advocated for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And if he is indeed running Iran policy, that is very problematic. But I haven't seen that being an official statement from the Trump administration. And I would advise Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and all those other people to veto this, that Brian Hook can have no role whatsoever in a future Trump administration. He's worse than Mike Pompeo. He's worse than John Bolton. He will bring about a war with Iran. And that's, Trump has said he doesn't want these wars, these endless wars. So we'll see what happens.
A couple of things. Trump Daddy writes, Scott is all right, but he puts Israel down too much. When America stops helping Israel, God will stop helping America. That is a fact. I question the fact part of it, but your response to Trump Daddy, Scott, that you're okay, but you put Israel down too much.
I just simply talk about the facts. When you say put Israel down, what
does that mean? Right.
Yeah. What fact do you disagree with the fact that Israel was almost in a state of civil war before October 7th? That Netanyahu's desire to change the basic law of Israel to take political control of the judiciary so that he could not be prosecuted for corruption charges? Did I make this up? No, it's a statement of fact. I didn't make it up. How am I putting Israel down by stating the fact? Am I putting Israel down when I point out that in consecutive military exercises in 2022 and 2023, Israel stress tested whether or not they could fight all of their enemies at once and found out that they couldn't without American military intervention? And so when Israel goes to war in 2023, 2024, fighting all their enemies, am I putting Israel down by pointing out that they were never going to be able to win this war? And now that the facts are backing me up, am I putting Israel down? Am I putting Israel down to point out that the Israeli military takes extreme umbrage at the relief of Golan and that there's a near civil war situation today? Am I putting Israel down? I don't think so. Am I putting Israel down by pointing out that continued settlement of the West Banks, it puts Israel in a position where it can't consider the potential of the creation of a Palestinian state at a time when the entire world is demanding the creation of a Palestinian state, making the sustainability of Israel in terms of a member of the international community impossible. Am I putting Israel down or stating fact? When I point out that Israel took a $67 billion economic hit last year and their economy is only going to tank further, that the Israeli economy is in a state of irreversible collapse. Am I putting Israel down or am I talking about the facts? I take extreme umbrage at your words, sir, because I'm not here to artificially prop up Israel. I'm here to speak fact. I'm here to speak truth. And these are the realities that have to be dealt with, especially if you support Israel, because if you don't change any of the factors I just said, Israel's done. Israel's finished. It's going down. And when you're reading God, I'll just tell you this. If you call yourself an American, understand we have no state religion. So keep God out of America. You can have God in your family. You can have God in your home. You can have God in your heart. But America is a nation founded on the principle that there is no state religion. So don't do that, man. That's about the most un-American thing you can do.
And one thing, Scott, I've known you for a number of years, and you use something that most of us don't understand: military math, which is a little different than the geometry and the calculus and the other the statistics that I took in graduate school. Military math. So when you look at conflict, when you look at these issues, as a trained warrior, you're using military math, which is different than the math I learned. Go ahead,
military
Scott.
math is basically, it requires an intimate knowledge of how it works. The first thing you have to do if you want to work is understand logistics and sustainability, which means you have what a basic load. That means the equipment you have on you when you initiate a fight. How long can you sustain the fight? What kind of enemy are you geared to fight against? And what is your replenishment? And where's that replenishment coming from? If your brain isn't thinking that way, don't even start talking about war, because this isn't Call of Duty. This isn't Medal of Honor. This isn't a computer game. This is the hardcore facts of war. You know, when we were starting to go to war in when we were looking at the potential of the invasion in 2003, in 2002. We got to the point where I told a good friend of mine, a very well-known journalist, I said, we're going to war. And he said, well, how do you know? And I said, well, because we've reached the point of no return in terms of what is known as the tip fiddle, which is basically the tactical phased logistics support. That's when we put all the munitions, everything on ships and start moving them towards a war. Once you get that in motion, the system isn't geared to stop. It means we are going to war. When you've executed a tip fiddle, you're going to war.
Wait a minute. Let me jump in. Let me jump in and ask you this, because you've just explained something that I've been wondering for a very long time. And if I have this story wrong, please correct me. Right before the United States, right before the George H.W. Bush went into Iraq, the story is Saddam Hussein sent George Bush a letter saying, please don't invade my country. I'm paraphrasing. Please don't invade my country. I will do whatever you are asking be done. Just don't invade my country. And the response from George Bush was, sorry, dude, it's too late. It's on. Is that because the switch had been flipped and the tip fiddle had been tipped?
Yeah. Once we started flowing troops in, flowing the logistics in, because it's not just the logistics, but it's the politics behind the logistics. Once you convince the Saudis to give you a base and understand the sensitivities of Mecca, Medina, and putting 18 to 20
the infidels on holy soil.
Not just infidels, but women infidels who in the heat are going to be down to their T-shirts, and the Saudis are saying they can't do that. We said, we'll kill you if you touch our women. We're going to war, stay out of it. And the Saudis had to back off, tell the mullahs not to say anything. This was a big deal, 750,000 American troops pouring into that region with, thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft, all the logistics. Once that system goes in, once it engages, we're going to war. It's not going to stop, because war just doesn't happen. Modern wars have to be prepared in advance, which is why Americans really need to focus on looking at our military buildup into Europe and in the Pacific, because as we build up, there comes a point where it's not part of the policy as normal. It's in addition to that, and we will cross the point of no return where war is inevitable. It cannot be stopped. And in the case of the war in 1991, we crossed that point in October of 1990. And in the case of 2003, we crossed that point sometime in the fall of 2002. So, this is the fact. Once we start moving that stuff, and then the other thing is, I spent a number of months at the Warfighting Center in Quantico in the lead up to the Gulf War, working with what that time was a Janus computer, like a supercomputer that we had programmed. I had went in and gotten all the aerial photographs, and I rebuilt.
We're stuck there a little, frozen a little on Scott there. And hopefully we'll be able to unfreeze him. And I have to just, folks, I am so appreciative to Scott for in the midst of trying to find his dog in the woods in upstate New York, after capturing Fluffy the Pomeranian, which I have named. Scott has been so gracious with his time. I was going to ask him as a final question. Robert made a comment, Russia sucks. They're getting their asses handed to them. Robert, I'm not sure where Scott has dropped in, and he might rejoin us, but if not, again, he's out in the hinterlands in upstate New York. So that's why, hey, sometimes this is live streaming, and sometimes you can't always be in control of what happens in life. And, Fluffy the Pomeranian escaped this morning. Scott had to go out and get Fluffy in the woods, and again, was so gracious to join us. But Robert, Russia sucks. They're getting their asses handed to them. On the Russia sucks point, well, I don't know. I've only been to Russia once, and didn't make it any further than the airport. So I can't speak to whether Russia sucks or not, but they're getting their asses handed to them. I would strongly suggest, Robert, you do a little more than listen to Malcolm Nance. And one of the things I was hoping to be able to do with Scott was get some discussion about Malcolm Nance, because he's been doing really nothing but spreading misinformation and disinformation and getting their asses handed to them. I don't know where you're getting your information from, but you're really getting wrong information. The experts that I know, Mark Schlaboda, Scott Ritter, the experts that I know have a entirely different perspective on that conflict. And one of the things that I think is, without getting into a whole lot of detail, and I'm only responding to a statement, I'm not responding to an exchange or a dialogue, is that whether it's looking at the conflict with Ukraine, or whether it's a matter of looking at the conflict with Iran and Lebanon and Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, Ansar Allah, a mistake that a lot of Americans make is we have a tendency to confuse restraint with fear. And when the conflict with Ukraine started back, I think that was February of 22. I think it was February of 22. I was saying, Scott said, a whole lot of folks said, oh, this is going to be over in 6 months. And initially, we were right in that. It started in February of 22. In April of 22, February, which it started like February 21st, March, wasn't even 2 months. Zelensky was negotiating a peace settlement with Putin. In fact, reached a peace settlement in April of 22. Boris Johnson flew in, told Zelensky the West will not support any peace settlement. So, for all intents and purposes, Russia won the conflict in April of 22. It was the West that wouldn't allow that peace agreement to be implemented. And so what I didn't factor into my analysis of that at that time was that the United States would be so willing to fight this battle till the last Ukrainian died. I didn't think that a Lindsey Graham would fly into Ukraine in as foolish of a manner in which he did and talk about the Ukrainians need to fight. The Ukrainians need to fight. Well, Lindsey, that's easy for you to say because you're talking about dead Ukrainians. You weren't talking about dead Americans. So, Robert, same thing with what's happening between Iran and Israel. They have an entire Iran, Hezbollah, Ansar Allah. They have in Yemen. They have a whole different mindset. They have a whole different approach. They have an entirely different strategy. Because understand, they're a resistance movement in the Middle East. Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, Hamas, they are a resistance movement. And the strategy and the tactics of a resistance are much, 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 much different than the strategy and the tactics of the aggressor. So you can't view action by Iran through the same prism as you're viewing the reaction to those responses. Here's an example. When I can't now, I've lost track of who was assassinated when, but there was one of the assassinations that took place, and Iran said, "Oh, so Israel attacked Iran, and then the United States said to Israel, the United States said to Iran, do not respond. Do not respond." And Iran said, hold up, we have to. We're going to because we have to, but here's what we're going to do. And Iran told the United States, we know the resources that were used to attack us, and we are going to target those resources, those bases, those listening posts, we know where the soldiers came from. We're going to attack those resources. And the United States said, well, okay. And Iran said, we're not going to target civilian populations. We're not, unlike Israel, we're not going to target neighborhoods. We're not going to target apartment buildings. We're not going to because in Islam, in war, you cannot target civilians. So I go through all that to say, you can't view the reaction of the resistance through the same prism or the same lens that you view the reaction of the aggressor. They have different objectives. They have different strategies. They have different tactics. So, Robert, that was a very, you can believe Russia's getting their asses handed to them if you want to. But if the West continues this fight, which Scott says once Trump gets sworn in, that probably won't happen. If they continue this fight, because Russia does not want to take over Ukraine. Show me, Robert, show me one legitimate piece of data, piece of evidence, one speech from Putin where he says, one piece from Lavrov where he says, we want to go in, we want to invade, we want to take over Ukraine. And once we take over Ukraine, we're going to use that as the launching point to take over Europe. I know that's been the song being sung by the Biden administration, which is why now their asses are on their way out. I know that's what they have been telling you. I know that's what MSNBC has been telling you. I know that's what CNN has been telling you. I know that's what Fox News has been telling you. But they've been lying to you, Robert. They've been lying to you. All right. So with that, folks, somebody asked who killed John Kennedy. Well, I think, there's a great book, Mary's Mosaic. If you want to do some insight into that, check out Mary's Mosaic. I'm drawing a blank on exactly who the author is, but to answer that question, check out Mary's Mosaic. And let me see what else we got. The cost to feed the world once and for all time, $330 billion. Yeah, we are wasting an awful lot of money. We are wasting an awful lot of resources. Hence, that's why I jokingly said to Scott, but I was quite very serious about the bullet that we need to be working on is the bullet train. So because if we talk about making America more secure, we talk about jobs, we talk about doing some things to replace the outsourcing of the deindustrialization of the United States. We need to be looking at infrastructure, seriously looking at infrastructure, and in doing so, mass transportation in the United States would be a great step in that direction. Black Slug says, I believe it's inaccurate to describe Shia Muslims naming for a missile to a religious concept. Black Slug, if you could clarify, I'm not quite sure what that means. I believe it's inaccurate to describe Shia Muslims naming of or for a missile to a religious concept. I don't understand, unless that's in response to my making the point about the Iranian government deciding that they're not going to target civilian populations because in Islam it is wrong to involve innocent civilians. But I don't think anybody will argue the point that in Islam there are rules of engagement, there are rules of war, there are rules of conflict in the holy text. So I'm not quite sure. I'm not debating that with you. I'm not sure exactly what your point is there. So with that, folks, I think it is safe to say that that I think Scott Ritter would agree that this change in administration will bring about a change in perspective, a change in approach, and that we may have just taken a step back from being engaged in World War III, let alone a nuclear engagement. I thought it was very interesting that he talked about, had Kamala Harris been elected, that we would within months find ourselves engaged in such an action. I don't think he's stretching the truth there too far, because Vice President Harris was very clear that her strategy, for all intents and purposes, was going to be a continuation of the Biden strategy. And we know what the Biden strategy has gotten us into. So with all of that, let me say to you all, I greatly, greatly appreciate you joining me today. Scott Ritter joined us from the swamp in upstate New York after catching Fluffy the Pomeranian. Greatly, greatly appreciate you doing so, my dear brother. Be safe as always. And I truly, Scott, look forward to having you back. Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes tomorrow. Got a great one for you tomorrow, as we had a great one for you today. Folks, also, please follow and subscribe. Leave a review. Share the show. Follow us on social media. Go to that Patreon account. Please assist us in this, because we are doing this with you. Excuse me. We are doing this with you. We are doing this for you. We can't do this without you. And I'm doing the research. I'm bringing the guests so that you all don't have to. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you all again tomorrow. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.